DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger on a Friday. Hope y'all are doing well. My name is Brandon Adams. I am the host of this program. I'm sure that your household is very much like mine as you head towards a weekend with no Georgia football. There's a lot of planning and talking of, well, what are we going to do with our Saturday now? Trying to figure out if there are any other games worth watching. Kind of. Maybe some fun. And, you typically think of sort of like fall fun this time of year. I think it's going to be 100 degrees, so maybe you'll go to the pool or something like that and just kind of extend the summer one more weekend here. But nonetheless, we got a lot of Georgia football talk we're going to have on our program today. A big look ahead to the Tennessee game next Saturday. We'll do that here as a part of the show today. We will preview some of the other games here this weekend. And a couple things off the top. Kind of an interesting look at DeAndre Swift. I think two big transfer players who've made major impacts on Georgia. And truly, what is the value of a close game? Georgia got a chance to play one against Notre Dame this past Saturday. We'll deal with all of that off the top of the program. Before we're done, I may also squeeze in, if I have time, a little bit of a statistical look at what ESPN thinks Georgia's chances of winning the national championship and making the college football playoff are right now. So we're going to try to be very, very busy today. There's no Georgia football on Saturday, but there is Georgia football talk right now as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is presented by Kroger. More ways to save fresh food, low prices at Kroger.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So I saw something kind of interesting on the internet this morning, and I wanted to use that as kind of a starting point for our program here today. Hey, everybody, welcome in. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger on a Friday. I was looking around, and sometimes I like to check in on the major national websites just to kind of see what like the national talking heads, or in this case, I guess, typing heads, the national media is saying about Georgia. CBSSports.com, like right there at the the kind of the main page headline above the fold type deal, they had one of their NFL mock drafts. Now I realize there are like 9 million NFL mock drafts. They change constantly. When it comes to this far out into the future, they are notoriously wrong. I'm sort of very much aware of all of that. But I could not help but notice that on the list from CBS Sports, Georgia running back DeAndre Swift comes in at number 19 on that list. Number 19 overall, the guy who's writing this, not a writer that I was necessarily all that familiar with, but a guy writing this, and I'll put a link to this when we post the show at the world-famous DawgNation.com a little later on today, but he had Swift going number 19 overall to the Chargers. Now, we don't do NFL talk on this show, but I will say for 2 seconds, it's kind of funny that obviously if Swift were to go to San Diego, that's essentially a replacement for Melvin Gordon, which make this like the worst holdout in pro football history, but you don't care about that. You want to talk about Georgia football. And it's not a surprise to me necessarily that NFL draft scouts might be looking a little more closely at Swift, and certainly the media that covers the NFL draft definitely looking a little bit more closely at Swift because of what he's done through the first 4 games for Georgia. I think one of the really interesting storylines thus far is what I thought would be kind of an ensemble cast of UGA running backs. I made a case a lot during the offseason that it wouldn't surprise me if we saw about 3 Georgia running backs share carries and productivity and therefore glory fairly equally. I was thinking it would be Brian Herring. I was thinking it would be DeAndre Swift. I was thinking it would be Zamir White in that group too. But through 4 games, including the most important game that Georgia's played thus far against Notre Dame this past Saturday, you certainly get the impression that when the game matters most, Georgia's going to go to DeAndre Swift. In the NFL, the media that covers the league, the scouts that populate the league with talent, they may notice. In fact, one of the things they may notice is seemingly how pleased Kirby Smart is with what Swift did this past Saturday against the Fighting Irish. Let me give you a couple short examples that Kirby Smart kind of compliments, but he does not throw around lightly. Here is a short one and a quick one. Kirby very pleased with DeAndre Swift.
There were some really large hearts out there tonight. One, DeAndre Swift, who ran the ball with passion, guts, and just relentless effort.
Yeah, sometimes passion, guts, relentless effort, that doesn't show up in the stat sheet because the overall stat numbers for DeAndre Swift won't look as good in that game as maybe some of the games that he had in 2018 or some of the games that he will have for the rest of the season in 2019. But as Georgia got better at running the ball late in the game, it was Swift who was providing that, and it was Swift who was getting those tough yards. It's almost like the symbolic nature of a superstar performance, and I don't think that's too big of a statement to use for Swift right now. He's one of the proven, trusted stars on this team, the kind of guy you lean on in key moments, and he came up big for Georgia this past Saturday. Here's Kirby Smart again on his faith in Swift when the game and the plays mattered most.
If number 7 is running the ball like he was running the ball, it's hard to give the ball to anybody else. I mean, the guy was making people miss, running possessed.
So listen, as I said before, if that's what Smart's saying coming off the game against Notre Dame, you better believe that NFL draft scouts are also noticing that as well, and you better believe the media that covers the intentions of those draft scouts, they're going to notice that too, which from that standpoint, it's not a surprise to see Swift mentioned number 19 overall in a CBS Sports mock draft. Now, at this point in the program, I know what some of y'all are saying. BA, what are you doing? You trying to wish Swift out the door? You trying to swiftly move him on, no pun intended, into the NFL? You trying to get him out of Athens? No, I am not. Obviously, I've enjoyed watching DeAndre Swift these last 3 seasons and can't wait to watch every other carry he gets the rest of his career here at UGA. But facts are facts, and let's face the facts here for a moment. The fact that DeAndre Swift is likely leaving at the end of the season and could have a chance to be a first-round pick, that has already helped Georgia's recruiting efforts, and it might help them even more. If you don't believe me, let me give you an example. Do you remember Kendall Milton when he was first talking about his relationship with Georgia? When he was first talking about why it was that he felt competent to commit to the University of Georgia, one of the things that he said pretty candidly is that the situation for how he'd be used at Georgia and the fact that he believes that Swift is on his way to the NFL, that was a major factor in his decision to come to UGA. If you don't believe me, here is Milton in his own words, as told to our buddy UGA DawgNation recruiting insider, Jeff Sintel. Here's Kendall Milton.
They answered all questions. They wanted to get me all the information I need to know that would make me successful at Georgia, and they did that very good. I like the situation, to be able to come in and play early, with DeAndre Swift leaving. That was probably the biggest thing for me.
I mean, listen, you can't gloss over that. Kendall Milton, who had his choice of anywhere he wanted to go, his list of finalists were all the major programs, all of which that need running backs and use running backs well. And he said, listen, I became very interested in Georgia because of how I was told I'd be used here, and the fact that when I look and see a guy like DeAndre Swift, I'm assuming he's on his way to the NFL. So I don't wish Swift out the door at Georgia, but the fact that he is likely leaving to go to the NFL keeps that pipeline of RBU kind of open and flowing. And then one more thing from Kendall Milton here. Let's say that this media guy at CBS Sports turns out to be right. And let's say that DeAndre Swift keeps doing the things that he's doing right now. And Georgia gets itself another high-profile NFL running back going in the first round. Now, Chubb didn't go in the first round, but he's essentially a major part of the Cleveland Browns offense. Sony Michel won the Super Bowl last year for New England. Todd Gurley at one point in time was arguably among the top players in the entire NFL. Not just this historic level of Georgia running backs dating back to Herschel Walker, but this recent trend of guys who've had great success in the league. If DeAndre Swift truly does become the next name added to that list after this year, having been coached by the current Georgia running backs coach Del McGee, then my gosh, how much easier does that make it for Georgia to recruit the next generation of Kendall Milton? Maybe even another back here for this 2020 class there as well. And if you don't believe how significant that recent trend of RBU dominance has been for Georgia, take a listen to Kendall Milton again in his own words.
It's huge to me, especially Coach McGee, coaching a majority of those backs. So it just shows that he knows what he's doing. He knows how to get people to the league, and that's my end goal that I want. So, that attracts me.
I mean, listen, I say this all the time. I think this is one of the most important maxims when it comes to football. You've got to make sure your number one strength stays strong. For Georgia, its number one strength, both on the field and in recruiting, is the legacy it's established at the running back position. The fact that the current running backs coach, Del McGee, has coached so many good ones at UGA, and the fact that both historically and in contemporary fashion, Georgia running backs are going on to do big things at the NFL. They become first-round pick, they make a lot of money, and they go and generate a bunch of highlights on the NFL Sundays. DeAndre Swift, if he keeps up what he's doing right now, could indeed be the next one of those. You better believe, as he's showing out on Sundays, the dividends will be reaped by Georgia for a long time to come. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. Good to have you with us, no matter how you get to us, live on video, 10 a.m., Dog Nation. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, radio at noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, or we are available as a podcast, the Apple Podcast Player, the Google Podcast Player, the world-famous DawgNation.com. No matter how you get them, we're glad you found us here today and really appreciate Kroger for making the program possible. By the way, speaking of our friends at Kroger, I wanted to make sure that you are very well aware that even though the weather's kind of hot right now, it will be getting cooled off here at some point in time, which means that all that fall stuff you love, including the pumpkin stuff, you can enjoy that with your friends at Kroger. You can save on everything that's pumpkin-related. Pumpkin spice coffee, pumpkin pies, pumpkin-scented candles. It will get you in the fall spirit. Even though you may be wearing shorts and short sleeves and everything else, a little taste of autumn never did anybody any wrong, and Kroger can give that for you right now. So it's good to have Kroger with us as a part of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans here today. Quick programming note, normally on Fridays is our buddy Jeff Sintel to talk about UGA recruiting. Jeff not with us today. We're instead going to get a preview of next Saturday's game for Georgia against Tennessee. Jimmy Hyams, friend of the program, been here with us on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger before. He does radio there in Knoxville, has covered the Tennessee program for a long time. Interesting insight on Vols fans quickly turning on Jim Chaney, maybe. Growing sour when it comes to Jeremy Pruitt, and maybe completely hopeless when it comes to next Saturday's game against UGA. If you're a UGA fan that likes to see Tennessee wallowing in misery, you may love this coming up with Jimmy Hyams in just a moment. We will get an update from him on what the feeling really is like in Knoxville right now. Before any of that, though, let's go around the doghouse. It's presented today by Merriweather and Tharp, and I want to give you a couple more updates from some of the things that Kirby Smart has talked about this week. Two very important points, maybe points of debate in some regard, but certainly important points that Smart himself addressed going back to last Saturday's game against Notre Dame. First of all, one of the trends, and I know we've done this on some of our comment section stuff the last few days. I think we may have done this a little bit on Before the Hedges presented by Kroger this past Wednesday. I'm just a really big believer in the value of transfer. Now, the batting average on these guys is never going to be 1,000. You're not going to be 100% perfect at bringing in transfers to your program and having them do big things. But when you have a chance to bring in a guy that's got major college experience, that has a way more times than not of paying off and providing some real value to you. On Saturday, that was certainly an example for Georgia. Lawrence Cager targeted 5 times, comes up with 5 big catches for UGA. Eli Wolf, the tight end position, has been doing a lot of things, maybe even more than I think the average fan would have assumed he would do. Frankly, even maybe more than I would have assumed he would have done for UGA up to this point in time. These transfer players have really provided a pretty significant spark for Georgia. Now, you can also add DJ Daniel into this a little bit. He's a transfer from a junior college. That's a little bit different kind of situation. But guys that played college football elsewhere last year doing big things for Georgia, it's been a little bit of a theme so far this season for the Dogs, and here's what Kirby Smart said about that earlier this week.
Those guys were all good players where they were last year. I mean, Wolf he went to the SEC media days. I mean, Lawrence Cager was a major factor for Miami, and DJ was his team's leading corner. So, I mean, they're good football players. We're just thankful and blessed to have recruited them and also prepared them to play in big games. That's why they came. They wanted to play these big games. I think they're good players, and they fit well in our system. They all three. I mean, we needed Eli Wolf, we needed Lawrence Cager, and we needed DJ Daniel. So they fit needs we needed, and they've played well.
One of my favorite things about the, for lack of a better phrase, like Kirby Smart doctrine that's in place at Georgia is that you bring in a bunch of talented players. Some of them are young and talented. Some of them are experienced and talented. Some of them are talented and got their experience playing for some other school. You bring them all together. You kind of put them in a pot during a very hot summer's worth of practices, or in some cases spring practices. You let them battle each other in rep after rep after rep, and then you assume that the cream is going to rise to the top. And that's a very, probably by my count, overly simplistic explanation of what Smart tries to do. But when it all boils down to it, the essence of Smart's philosophy at Georgia, I think, is a little bit simple. That if you bring in enough good players and you practice them in enough intense conditions, by the time you're ready to play games, you have a pretty good idea of who belongs on the field. And pretty clearly, Cager and Wolf have shown that they belong, and they are big contributors to Georgia right now. It's a credit to the Dogs, who've recruited high school guys at an unprecedented rate, that they don't just sit on those laurels and say, hey, to quote Norman Dale from Hoosiers, my team's on the field. We already feel pretty good about what we have. No, there's always that look of good roster, but how can it get a little bit better? good roster, but how can we plus it just that 1% more? And that's what Cager and Wolf have kind of provided for Georgia, that extra 1%. And that could be a major difference. Clearly it was on Saturday against Notre Dame. Now, one more thing about the game against the Fighting Irish. We have certainly debated on here, and I love that if you're watching a video, that picture of Kirby Smart right there where he's kind of exhaling at the end of that game. I apologize if you're radio podcast, you don't get to see that. But that picture, maybe as much as anything, is kind of like the classic look of what it was really like after the game against the Fighting Irish on Saturday, that, we held on, we won this football game. But there'll be this ongoing debate amongst fans, and heaven knows we've done this. Did Georgia prove how good it was by winning close? Or did it prove it's got some problems to address by the fact that it didn't vanquish the Irish in more absolute fashion than it did? But Kirby Smart had something kind of interesting to say about that this week, too. So here's a part of Around the Doghouse presented by Merriweather and Tharp. Let's hear Smart on that.
I personally like them better when you beat them, and it's a little more decided. But there's going to be games like that. I mean, that's critical. I 100% think when you play in the SEC, you're going to play games like that week in and week out. I don't know who it's going to be. I don't know which one it's going to be, but everybody's going to look at the Las Vegas Lions and say, well, they're supposed to beat this team. Those games are going to come down to those crunch time plays and decisions and opportunities, and the only way you get better at them is be in them. So at least we gain some confidence from the fact we played in it, and I can acknowledge that is helpful, that we got a little, hey, we can handle this adversity.
Oftentimes in life, more than one thing is true at the same time. Admittedly, I believe that the first part of Smart's statement is the most true. The great teams prove their greatness by avoiding close games, not necessarily by winning close games. However, there's no doubt that Georgia can gain some confidence for itself by the fact that it asserted itself a bit more in the second half this past Saturday than it did in the first. I think that's pretty good there by Georgia coach Kirby Smart. It's Around the Doghouse. It's presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And, of course, as you know, divorce is the kind of thing that people don't really like talking about, right? And you better believe if you don't like talking about it, you definitely don't like going through it. And some of you, unfortunately, just based on the stats, listening to me right now, may find yourself either on the verge of going through this or actually in the throes of this. And if you are in the midst of this at the moment, I hope you got a great advocate like Merriweather and Tharp on your side. And if you're beginning this process or thinking it might be on the way, here's what I can tell you that's really cool about Merriweather and Tharp. They want to provide answers to some of the really tough questions that you probably have. And a lot of this is free. Their blog posts, their podcasts, there's even a free initial consultation that, Merriweather and Tharp, they just want to be a friend for you during this really, really difficult time, and you need that. The good news is things can be put back together, and you will one day feel whole again. But while you're going through this, it's important to have an advocate, and that is what my friends at Merriweather and Tharp are. You can find them online, and I hope you'll write this website down. It's theatlantadivorceteam.com. Theatlantadivorceteam.com. That'll get you in touch with Merriweather and Tharp. All right, it's great to have you with us here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We have got some good stuff coming up, including a little bit of a look ahead to this weekend and what's next for Georgia. That's all on the way. But as we said before, hope you enjoy Jimmy Hyams right now. And we will get Jimmy here coming up in just a moment. We'll get rolling with him and talk to him about Georgia, Tennessee, and everything to expect this upcoming Saturday. And, of course, we'll catch up with Jeff Sentell again next week there as well. So it sounds like he's ready to go. So let's get this cranked up. And as I said before, great to have you with us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So Jimmy Hyams gets the DawgNation insider music. We'll adopt him into the DawgNation family, at least for one day, I guess, here a little bit on that. He has certainly been covering Tennessee for a long time. Nobody knows the scene around Knoxville better, and that's a scene that Georgia fans are about to get very much acquainted with as the Dogs head there next Saturday from WNML, really good sports radio station there in the city of Knoxville. It's Jimmy Hyams back here on DawgNation Daily once again. Jimmy, thanks for spending time with us today. I really appreciate you being with us and hope you're doing well. All right, sounds like he's having a little bit of an issue there. We'll see if we can get that figured out, get his phone situation squared away. We'll get him back up and running here in just a moment. I can hear something coming from him, but it sounds like he can't hear us. So while we figure that out and get that squared away, let me pop over here and get a few of your comments on both Facebook and YouTube, and we'll give you a chance to react, and we'll talk to Jimmy Hyams here coming up in just a minute once we kind of get some of that kind of stuff cleaned up and squared away. And, of course, looking forward to next week in Knoxville. I know that one of the hot topics this week has kind of been what might go on with the with the Georgia fans trying to travel up there. Georgia fans made that a little bit of a history as of late, going into opposing team stadiums. So we'll see if that does indeed become the case here this upcoming Saturday, or I should say next Saturday as well. All right, let's start on Facebook here for a moment. Mark Godfrey says, you just thought you had him, BA. Yeah, sometimes that happens, Mark. Listen, we try to be nimble around here. We try to be nimble. Funny line from Matt Talley. Yeah, listen, Matt, right now things are probably not that great in Knoxville. And obviously when it's one of your rivals that go through that, a lot of Georgia fans really enjoy that. But I guarantee you that the Vols fans are probably sick and tired of being sick and tired. Seems like they've been that for a while. And so we shall see, kind of what the mood is there, what they're feeling like there. Spencer Quarles says maybe it's like the Walking Dead with the scene where like all the cars are parked and everyone's abandoned. Maybe that's the case. Could very well be. Jeremy Lloyd says he thinks that Georgia needs to have 4 to 5 sacks against Tennessee. You kind of get that back on track with the havoc rate, after maybe not seeing as much of that against Notre Dame, at least in terms of the sacks and the tackles for loss as you would have liked. Maybe that is indeed the case there. Danny Smith said, BA said, let's get this cranked up. Listen, on a Friday, you want to kind of keep it cranked, or as the kids say, crunk. Probably shouldn't even be saying that. All right. Telvin Phelps and the subject of the Georgia running backs. Yeah, there's no doubt that Georgia's got a deep crop of backs right now, but there's also no doubt that the one that Georgia seemingly trusts the most right now is the one that the nation knows the most about, and that's DeAndre Swift. When it comes to Harrion and White, and even this past Saturday, James Cook, Georgia seemingly returned to Swift over and over again, especially in those crucial moments in the game on the line. I don't necessarily think it remains that way for the entirety of the season, but that was certainly the case this past weekend. Let me see if I can pull up over here on YouTube for a moment, just kind of get them involved a little bit too. So I hear something going on with the phones, but maybe not quite what we need for it to be to have everybody rocking and rolling and ready to go here, but I'm sure we'll get that done in just a second. Let's see what's going on with YouTube. We'll get a few YouTube comments, and hope y'all are having a Friday. GB2 says, BA, over under UGA has more fans than Tennessee and Neyland. I got to go under on that. Listen, Tennessee fans will still come. This is still a rivalry game for them, so that'll bring some of their fans out. But what I tried to make the point of yesterday is that I think that our vantage point for some of this kind of stuff has gotten quite skewed. Last year Georgia probably took, by my estimation, and maybe other people have a different number, but I try to be conservative about this and try to be accurate. I think it was like 20,000 Georgia fans in Baton Rouge a year ago, which is not an easy thing to do at all. So, Michael, I'm hearing something. Should we see if can he hear us? Jimmy, do you have us? Can you hear us? All right, sounds like he might not be able to hear me. We might want to see if, might want to see if my return's going back to him or what. There sounds like we got a little bit of an issue on that. Unknown says, BA use a landline. Yes, we do use a landline for these. We do indeed use a landline for that. Yes, so the only thing I would know to say is check to see if the return back on the device is going back to him, and then we'll see if we can figure that out. But if certainly we appreciate the patience of everyone involved here. And Unknown says that's his car sound. Well, listen, I can't control what kind of phone he's on. This issue, I believe, is on our end, though. All right, let me just get some comments here. We'll just talk about this. David Jackson says Swift's nickname is the Philly Flyer. Certainly he represents Philadelphia well. Brian McPhail says Notre Dame needs to take down UVA. I'd be really careful with Notre Dame this Saturday. I think that we talked about this during our R.S. Andrews cool down a little earlier in the week, that when you look at the history of these really physical games, whether it be, the week after teams play Alabama, AL.com did a great story on this a couple of years ago. Another example of this would have been, believe it or not, when Brett Bielema was coach at Arkansas. There was a little bit of a trend the week after playing Arkansas. Even though Arkansas wasn't really good, Arkansas was really, really physical, and that takes something out of you. And now Georgia is kind of in that category, certainly, with the size of its offensive and defensive lines. Brian Kelly called this the most physical game he'd seen his team play. I'd be really careful about that physicality taking a toll on Notre Dame here this week. I also think Notre Dame has heard kind of a weird week's worth of press clippings of how great they looked in a loss. That's a weird thing to hear about your team for an entirety of a week, and all of a sudden now it's not a great Virginia team. They struggled with Old Dominion last week, but it's not an easy out necessarily either. I think that Notre Dame finds itself in a pretty tricky spot. There's also a chance across the Midwest this week of weather being a factor in some of these games. My understanding is a lot of rain is expected to roll through Indiana and Nebraska and some of that area around the Midwest. So you could see rain impact the Notre Dame Virginia game. Keep your eye on that. Also, rain potentially impacting, and maybe in a big way, the Nebraska game against Ohio State on Saturday night. So you could see rain being a factor in a couple of those games here this weekend. What else is going on over here? So, yeah, to go back to thinking about the fans for a moment, I think we get our viewpoints skewed about how many Georgia fans have been in some of these stadiums recently. If Georgia has even as much as 20,000 next week, that's an enormous, enormous total. I mean, think about all the hype there was for the Georgia-Notre Dame game, how big that was supposed to be. There probably wasn't a person over 10,000 Notre Dame fans this past Saturday. Remember, Georgia had kind of brought in some extra.
I can hear.
Okay, so
I can hear.
Okay, so it sounds like.
I can hear.
Okay, so it sounds like Jimmy Hyams with us. Jimmy, can you hear us now?
Yes, sir. I can hear you.
All right, I apologize for the inconvenience on that. I really appreciate that. Let me just kind of clean things up here a little bit. We'll have more of your comments coming up. It sounds like Jimmy Hyams is ready, so why don't we dive in that and talk a little Georgia, Tennessee with him, and of course, as we said before, let me just excuse me 1 second here. All right, now we are back live again with Jimmy Hyams. And, Jimmy, it's going to be a big one next Saturday for Georgia against Tennessee there in Knoxville. Obviously, maybe a little bit bigger for Georgia right now than it is Tennessee. You know, you're there in Knoxville. You know the feeling of fans on this right now. I mean, what is the mood? And I guess at this point in time, given the fact that the Vols didn't play very well at Florida last week, I guess what is the feeling of Tennessee's chances of being competitive at all with Georgia next Saturday?
There's complete frustration among this fan base, and not a whole lot of folks in the Vol Nation that think Tennessee can compete with Georgia. And I don't think Tennessee can compete with Georgia, not yet. Georgia's a far superior team. They're better at quarterback. They're better at the line of scrimmage. They're better in most areas against Tennessee. And Tennessee, for goodness sake, they lost to Georgia State, which then lost to Western Michigan 57-10 and gave up 450 rushing yards. Tennessee, there's been a disconnect, in my opinion, between Tennessee's coaching staff and the players. The coaching staff on paper looks good. Tennessee's players on paper, they've got plenty of 4- and 5-star players, not as many as Georgia or Alabama or LSU, but they've got almost 40 players on the roster that were 4- or 5-star players. And there's just been a disconnect for whatever reason. It's kind of hard to explain. But I did ask Jeremy Pruitt the other day, is your team playing without confidence? And he said, well, we've got a lot of players on our team that have become numb to losing. That's not a good sign.
Yeah, that's a really well put statement there. That's not the feeling you want. The other thing, the point I've kind of made in the past is Pruitt didn't speak to reporters when he was at Alabama. He spoke to reporters some when he was at Georgia, but I don't think of him as particularly adept at using the media to his advantage. I don't think of him as a smooth talker necessarily, nor do I. Certainly from the outside looking in, does it seem like he has many allies among the Knoxville media right now. He had the weird thing that he said this week about how this team is 100 times better than last year's team was. That, to my, the best I can tell, was not very well received by media or fans, either one. How good is Pruitt right now at making his own case for why he's the one to fix all this?
Well, going back to your comment earlier about dealing with the media, last year he wasn't very good at all. He's better this year, and he's more comfortable in doing it. But I was talking to somebody this morning about whoever gave him that line about we're 100 times better shouldn't have done it. And I said, I don't think anybody gave it to him. I think he came up with that one. But there are not a whole lot of things to look at so far that would make you optimistic. This is just a statement of fact. If you go back to the first 16 games of Tennessee coaches in their history, only 2 have a worse record after 16 games than Pruitt. One of them coached in the early 1900s, and the other one was John Majors, who took over a major rebuilding job. He was 5-10-1. Pruitt is 6-10. If I were to look at 2 things that have been pretty good about Tennessee under Pruitt, he's got a freshman class. They signed 19 freshmen.
Yeah.
And somebody who's very close to the program told me there's not a bust in the group. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
If you go 19 for 19, that's pretty darn good. the other thing is, on paper, he's got a good-looking staff. But this staff has not done, in my opinion, a very good job. They didn't get the team ready for Georgia State. They did not go into prevent defense against Brigham Young when they had the Cougars backed up. Those are two coaching blunders that I think have led to a 1-3 start rather than 3-1.
Do you think that Tennessee fans still view Georgia as a rival, or are they so sort of, I guess, frustrated by their own situation they're not thinking much about rivals? We know the numbers against Florida haven't been good now for about a decade and a half. You know, we can all remember back when Georgia-Tennessee was one of the games you had circled on the calendar. Next Saturday, do Tennessee fans kind of put that, their own issues with their own team aside and look forward to cheering against Georgia, or is there even that feeling in Knoxville right now?
Well, I don't know that they look at Georgia as a rival. I think they're more concerned about what's happened with this program and how can it get better. And I don't know that you could find a whole lot of people that around here that think Tennessee's going to beat Georgia. I'm not one of them. I certainly don't see that. Now, some odds maker sent me a deal, said that Georgia's going to be favored by about 28. I guess we'll see.
Wow.
Of course, Tennessee's favored by 26 against Georgia State in law, so we know crazy things can happen. But the other thing about Georgia, I'm hearing Georgia is going to pack Neyland Stadium. They had over, 30,000 for the game at Notre Dame in 2017.
Yeah.
They had about 30,000 for the Vanderbilt game August 31. And I was told they're planning a red out. Not a red black checkerboard, but a red out. Maybe they'll do both. I don't know. But I know that Georgia bought their allotment of 6,500 tickets. That's all they get. But I wouldn't be surprised to see at least 20,000 Georgia fans in the stands. And that's the thing that gets the attention of the administration, the board of trustees, and the decision makers whenever you've got the opposing team taking over your stadium. And Tennessee's attendance this year has not been very good either. That's another issue.
Yeah, I think that's a very important thing to keep your eye on. It has been certainly true that a lot of Georgia fans have talked about the idea of having a big showing there next Saturday. That'll be interesting to follow and pay attention to. What about Jim Chaney for a moment? That's obviously a name that Georgia fans know really well, offensive coordinator. Now, Jimmy, you've been around for a long time. You know that offensive coordinators often aren't popular. Chaney sometimes wasn't popular with UGA fans, but it was certainly a high-profile move when he left Athens to go to Knoxville. And it's hard for me to tell if the issue with the Tennessee offense right now is maybe due to his play calling, due to an offensive line that seems to be struggling. Garantano, the quarterback, certainly has seemed to have his issues. How much of the struggles of what's going on for Tennessee this year do you put at the feet of Jim Chaney?
That's a hard question to answer. I would have to put some there, but it is difficult if you've got a quarterback that's not playing well and you got an offensive lineman that's not at an SEC standard. You still should beat Brigham Young and Georgia State, okay? And you still should be more competitive against Florida. But for whatever reason, in my opinion, there's a disconnect between Jim Chaney and Jarrett Garantano. Is Chaney asking Garantano to do too much? One of the things Garantano talked about before the season was he loved the idea of Chaney putting more responsibility on him. Checked at the line of scrimmage, putting the offensive line in the right pass protection, getting everybody lined up. And I'm wondering if maybe Garantano's overloaded. Maybe that's not the smart thing to do. Maybe they should take some of that off his plate and just call the play and not give him any responsibility in terms of checking off at the line and doing those things. And Garantano, he had a tendency a year ago to steer receivers down. It's worse this year. And that's one reason I think he had so many passes tipped against Florida. It's one reason he's thrown more interceptions this year than he did all of last year. But when your quarterback is playing as poorly as Garantano, your offensive line isn't very good. Your offense ain't going to be very good. I don't care how good maybe if you got Herschel Walker and, I don't know, Jerry Rice and Jerry Jeudy at receiver, maybe you can do something. But Tennessee doesn't have that. Tennessee has got talent at receiver and at running back. But they have just not been able to be consistently productive. And does that fall some on Chaney not putting Garantano in position to be successful? Maybe. But it's really hard for me to completely discern that.
We appreciate your time and being with us here today. Let me do a couple quick things before we let you go. Where is Philip Fulmer in all of this? I gather that Fulmer with Tennessee fans is popular. There are some people outside of Knoxville that kind of mock him sometimes because we see him wearing coaching gear and things like that. It almost from afar seems like he wouldn't mind, sliding back into that sideline position that he was in the past. How do Vols fans feel about Fulmer right now, and do they trust him to make the evaluation on Pruitt going forward?
Well, I think most of the fans here like Fulmer, although some are like, no, wait a minute, we gave you the benefit of the doubt on hiring this guy Pruitt and what's he done. So there's a little bit of a wonderment. Look, Fulmer's not going to say anything. He's not going to come out. Some people think he should come out and show support for Pruitt. A lot of times I've seen a person in the administration give a vote of confidence, and then 2 weeks later the coach is fired. I don't think Fulmer's going to put himself in a position to do something like that. So he's kind of gone quiet on this deal. But there are some people wondering about Fulmer. And here's the thing. Some think, hey, if you got to fire Pruitt, you got to fire Fulmer. Fulmer hired Pruitt. But I would also argue, and the Fulmer camp would tell you, and this is accurate, when he became the athletic director, there weren't as many fish in the pond to pick from as there were when John Curry was the AD. If Fulmer had been the AD at the very start and made the decision to hire a coach, I don't think it would be Pruitt. But Tennessee went through, they waited on Dan Mullen, he goes to Florida. They had Greg Schiano, and that got blown up. They talked to Chad Morris at Arkansas. They talked to Braun at Purdue. They talked to Doran at NC State, and I think they even tried O'Brien with the Houston Texans, and they couldn't get any of them. And then they had Mike Leach on the hook, but they fired Curry. So would Fulmer have hired any of those guys? I don't know. I don't know if he'd have got it done. But I will say this, when it came his time to try to hire a coach, there just weren't that many options. So I'm not sure if it's 100% fair to blame Fulmer for hiring Pruitt.
Well, Jimmy, it is really great to have you here on the program. I know it's a interesting radio show you have to do every single day to, at least right now, with Tennessee fans who are not happy with the current state of their program. But we appreciate you giving us a little insight as to what might happen next Saturday. For people who want to know more about some of the stuff that you're doing and some of the coverage you're providing there in Knoxville, how can UGA fans kind of get in touch with you online?
Well, you can find us sportsradiownml.com. We do a blog a couple times a week. Also, my Twitter account is at Jimmy Hyams. At one time, I had 24 fake accounts, so please be careful when you go to at Jimmy Hyams. You can find the right one. That's another way to follow us. And you can get us on iHeartRadio. And if you're in this area, you can find us at 99.1 FM, 990 AM. We're on from 3 to 7, and we do 3 weekend shows, a pregame show, postgame show, and a Sunday morning show.
Great to hear, Jimmy. Thanks for your time here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. Really appreciate you being with us today.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Good stuff there. Jimmy Hyams, WNML. He's been around the Tennessee scene for a long time. If you want to know the true facts on the ground there, he certainly provides that. There are a couple of interesting things that Jimmy brings up I want to make sure we talk about here before we kind of move on to discuss something else. Before that, though, let me remind you about my friends at the Atlanta and North Georgia Building Trades Council. This is a great organization for those of you who kind of do this kind of construction work for a living, because one of the things they're going to do is give you a chance to just have a better quality of life and make more money. I'm talking about economic stability here, which is a very important thing. You can earn as much as $100,000 while serving in an apprenticeship. I'm talking about earn while you learn, no tuition apprentice training. It's employer-paid pension and insurance, wages up to 30% higher than non-union workers. And this isn't just for men. Women and everyone else is encouraged to apply. So if you are a part of this industry, make sure you check this out. Let's see that one more time, please, if you don't mind. The Atlanta and North Georgia Building Trades Council. You can get in touch with them online at georgiaconstructioncareers.com, georgiaconstructioncareers.com, or you can give them a call at 404-584-0005. That number, once again, 404-584-0005. All right, a couple things that Jimmy had to say there that I think are really pretty interesting for us today. First of all, we talked about this yesterday, the push by Georgia fans to fill the stadium next Saturday. Isn't it interesting that a guy that lives in Knoxville, as a radio host, speaks to Tennessee fans every single day, clearly they've gotten the word about that, and clearly his audience is certainly concerned that Georgia fans may do that. Now, I'm still not of the belief that you're going to see red and black checkerboard all across Neyland Stadium next Saturday. But the fact that it's even being mentioned as a possibility, I think just speaks to, first of all, the reputation that Georgia fans have established themselves. Here's a guy in Knoxville clearly aware of what UGA fans did 2 years ago in South Bend. You can add that to the list of what Georgia did this past beginning of the season in Nashville, when the entirety of the stadium almost was Georgia Red. At least the overwhelming majority of that was Georgia Red. So one way or another, it is likely to be a very big Georgia showing next Saturday. Lots of red, lots of black. Does it end up looking coordinated? Listen, I wouldn't put anything past UGA fans when it comes to that, but one way or another, this will be probably another one of those trophies on that list of stadium takeovers for UGA. It's going to probably be pretty significant there in Knoxville because the Vols fans are apparently already pretty concerned about that. The other thing that you couldn't help but notice when talking to Jimmy, and I do think this is kind of interesting, not so much for the game next Saturday, but kind of for the long-term future of Jeremy Pruitt. You know, one of the things that makes Pruitt's situation a little bit different than Kirby's was, even in 2016, now Kirby was never struggling as bad in 2016 as Pruitt seemingly is struggling in year 2 right now, but there was always that thought of, hey, wait till Kirby recruits his guys. Wait till you get that recruiting class going. Even during the 2016 season, there was a lot of optimism that the 2017 recruiting class was going to be a good one for Georgia. And I think the Georgia coaches believe they had an even better run building towards 2018, even when some fans didn't necessarily believe that. There was always this like recruiting thing to look at and see on the horizon. You just heard Jimmy Hyams say, at least what you read between the lines on is that Tennessee fans aren't doing that right now when it comes to Pruitt's 2020 class. Even though seemingly he's got a lot of early playing time to sell, and I think almost every Georgia fan at this point would say Tennessee's relationship with like a guy like a Rick Gilbert's probably better than Georgia's is. But somehow those things aren't quite working out to develop any kind of optimism on the part of Tennessee. The one thing that Pruitt's supposedly good at, recruiting, doesn't seem to be earning him a lot of favor right now. It is an odd time at Tennessee where you've got throngs of fans who gave their patience to guys who probably didn't deserve. Guys like Butch Jones, guys like Derek Dooley, at least as a head coach, maybe the late stages, even the Philip Fulmer. They gave a lot of that patience over to guys that weren't necessarily good stewards of that patience. And now you have a very restless fan base, and Jeremy Pruitt's not providing them what they need. Georgia goes to Tennessee next Saturday. They're going to find themselves a messy situation with Big Orange.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, so great to have Jimmy Hyams as a part of DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger here today. Very interesting stuff. Let me now look at some of the other games coming up this weekend. We'll do that as part of our MyBookie Best Bets. And, of course, my friends at MyBookie, one of the great ways to make this weekend more entertaining, if your favorite team is not playing, which obviously it isn't, the Georgia Bulldogs have the week off, you can make somebody your favorite team of the moment by getting a bet down on them. And if you've never done this before, MyBookie makes it really easy to get started, and they've got a great perk for you when you sign up, a deposit bonus. You can get up to $1,000 deposit bonus. You can get up to, they'll double your first deposit in some cases. So also great player perks as you play with them throughout the season. So simply find MyBookie online. Type this into your browser, MyBookie. Type MyBookie into your browser, find MyBookie online, and use the promo code DawgNation. That's all one word, spelled the way it's supposed to be, D-A-W-G. You want all those things I said before? The deposit bonus, kind of put more money in your account. You're almost like a winner before you even start. You've got to use the promo code DawgNation to make that happen. After that, you play, you get paid. You actually got to win first. You play, you win, you get paid. It's as simple as that at MyBookie. Find them online, MyBookie. Use the promo code DawgNation. And after that, well, best of luck to you. All right, so let's talk about a few of these games here this weekend. A lot of really big spreads in the SEC. And in some cases, this weekend provides a little bit of a look ahead as to what to expect from a Georgia fan's perspective going forward. A&M in Dallas, they play this game at Jerry World every year. Huge favorite against Arkansas. I think Arkansas is one of the worst teams in the country. I've tried to back them before against other bad teams, just can't do it. Arkansas is as bad as it gets. A&M desperately needs a win. I think they bully Arkansas on Saturday, take them no matter what the number is. It's 23.5 right now, but I would take them even more than that. Ole Miss, I think, is now going to quit on their season. I thought they got jobbed by some pretty suspicious officiating this past Saturday when they hosted Cal. I thought they deserved a review near the end of the game. They did not get it. John Rice Plumlee probably starting in Bryant-Denny Stadium. That is probably the recipe for a disaster, although Plumlee did not play badly when he came in for Matt Corral last week. Alabama is, that half-point matters here, 35.5-point favorites versus Ole Miss. But they've scored, I want to say, 60-plus 2 years in a row against Ole Miss. Probably do that again on Saturday. I think the over's a great play here, but minus 35.5, Alabama dominates Ole Miss. Here's another game that Georgia fans ought to be watching for closely. How for real is Auburn? Two of the biggest wins anyone's gotten thus far in the 2019 season. Neutral site versus Oregon last week at Texas A&M. but can they come home as a relatively sizable favorite against Mississippi State, a team that I don't think is very good, but the Bulldogs did find a win last week against Kentucky? Can Auburn make this look easy? I believe they probably will. I believe that Auburn is in a comfortable spot right here, but this is definitely one worth watching just to see how comfortable Auburn makes this look. I think the Mississippi State offense is not great. I do obviously you'd have to be impressed with the Auburn defense at the moment. I think this is a big spot for Auburn, but if you're curious about what Georgia versus Auburn in November looks like, this game against Mississippi State may go a long way towards telling you that. You see right now Kentucky, South Carolina listed as a South Carolina. That's a -2.5. That game is actually probably moved up more like 3 now. You'd probably have a hard time finding 2.5. If you can, I think South Carolina is a huge play. Even at 3, I think the Gamecocks are probably better than Kentucky. I said before the start of the season that Kentucky was my pick to finish last in the SEC East. I haven't seen anything yet this season to change my mind on that. If you are heading for a last place, you lose this game here. I don't have a ton of trust for South Carolina right now. I took them last week and I lost, but I'll take them again here against Kentucky. Moving right along with some national games, I believe that Notre Dame wins against Virginia, but I think they're beaten up after Georgia, and I think they've heard a lot of praise for how close they kept against the Dogs. That's a recipe for disaster. Virginia did not look great last week against Old Dominion, but I believe in what could be rainy conditions, they keep it closer than the experts think against the Fighting Irish. I think that Jacob Eason has a good game on Saturday. I think Washington coasts against USC. USC, a lot of injuries at the quarterback position, plus Chris Peterson against Clay Helton. That's a coaching mismatch in favor of the Huskies. I think that I think Washington's a pretty good play there. Clemson has not really gotten going as of yet. They're on the road at UNC on Saturday. UNC listed in most spots as a 26.5-point underdog at the moment. I believe that Mac Brown may have just enough magic to keep this one a little bit close. Until the Clemson offense really breaks out, and up to this point in time it just kind of hasn't, but until it breaks out, I am going to kind of be on the side of the underdog here to at least keep that one a little bit close. And then finally, and something tells me the results of this game we may end up talking about a little bit. Ohio State goes to Nebraska. Game day is going to be there on Saturday. Nebraska, big underdog, 17.5-point underdog in Lincoln. Probably be a rabid crowd. Nebraska desperately needs something. Scott Frost, the coach there, desperately needs something. I think the right side on this is probably Nebraska, but let's say I'm wrong on that for a moment. Now, I don't think Nebraska wins. I just think they cover the spread. But let's say I'm wrong on that for a moment. Let's say that Justin Fields has another really big game. He had 6 touchdowns last week, all in the second quarter. Ohio State nearly scored 80 points. Really, the Buckeyes haven't really played anybody yet of any merit whatsoever, but Fields has been doing great. Big performance at Indiana a couple of weeks ago, for instance. His first road start, passed that test with flying colors. This is definitely a step up in weight class here to go play Nebraska. If Fields looks really big here, if he plays really, really well here, when what is going to be essentially among the most paid attention to games of the weekend on what is kind of a light weekend, you better believe the Justin Fields talk is going to heat up and intensify. And all of a sudden, that thing that some fans have dreamed about or some media has dreamed about, a Jake Fromm versus Justin Fields playoff showdown, all of a sudden, after this Saturday, if Fields looks great again, that looms as a very real possibility. And that conversation, after this past weekend, could certainly heat up. We'll make that your SEC through. Here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, when we think about Kroger, we think about the weekend. And I know for a lot of you, as I said to our video audience before our show started today, a lot of you are left to wonder, well, what do we do this week? There's no Georgia football. That's normally the thing that occupies most of our Saturdays. What is the story for this weekend? Well, as hot as it is, if your pool's still open in your neighborhood, you may be going to the pool or certainly on your back porch or your patio or your front porch, whatever else, down in the basement watching some games. Either way, whatever your weekend plans are, the best way to get stocked up for that is with our friends at Kroger. And Kroger also gives us a chance to look ahead for not just this weekend for Georgia, but a couple of upcoming weekends as well, because I wanted to take just a brief, quick moment here to look at the rest of the Georgia schedule, because I think the month of October, which we kind of normally think of as like the middle of the college football season where things get really, really intense, the idea of the showdown Saturdays and things like that typically come in the month of October. At least historically that's been the case. But for Georgia this month, that's not going to really be the case. Can we show folks, at least for the folks watching on video, here's what the month of October looks like for Georgia. Now, you're going to sandwich this between a bye week this week, then it's at Tennessee, home for South Carolina on October the 12th, home for Kentucky on October the 19th, another bye, and that ends the month for Georgia. So in the month of October, you know, a weird schedule. This isn't a good thing or a bad thing or anything like that. It's just a thing. But you're talking about a weird college football schedule. Georgia only plays 3 times in the month of October. Now, after that bye week on the 26th, obviously it gets really cranked up, and the one that around here we believe matters more than anything else, that showdown in Jacksonville against Florida on November 2nd. And after that, it's, Katie bar the door, batten down the hatches, and it's going to be, 100 miles an hour to the finish line after that. But what a weird October for Georgia. Huge favorite in the 3 games that it does play. 2 bye weeks will sandwich those games before starting the month of November with Florida. So after what was a pretty intense game this past Saturday and a lot of hot takes for the good and for the bad coming up about Georgia on that, probably a little bit of a lull for the next few weeks in terms of what we really feel like we know about Georgia. But for Kirby Smart, who wants to keep developing these young guys on defense, outside linebackers and guys contributing to the havoc rate, young receivers. These games the next couple of weeks will certainly be good stepping stones kind of getting that done, so that by the time that November rolls around and Georgia takes a big step up in competition, they will do so with a team that suddenly feels a lot more experienced because of what was gained by playing the Tennessee, South Carolinas, and Kentuckys of the world. It's our Kroger Kickoff. It's presented by Kroger, and one thing that is on the way is flu season. Now, that's not good news, but here's what is good news, is that Kroger's got you covered when it comes to flu vaccination. There's no appointment needed, and that's great. But what's even better is that you can get your flu shot at Kroger with a copay that can be as low as $0. So to find out more about this, check out Kroger.com/flu. That website, once again, Kroger.com/flu. Hope you'll check that out.
Let's take a look.
All right, we will get ready to wrap up today's program, and as we do, I will tell you, we'll do our Gator Hater Updater in just a moment. Something else I wanted to do here for a second, I wanted to look at what ESPN kind of has as Georgia's playoff odds right now. Heather Dinich has this up at ESPN.com right now, looking at various teams. That ESPN gives Clemson a 76.6% chance of making the playoff, almost a 25% chance of winning the title. Alabama's at 70 for the playoff, 28.4 to win the national championship. Ohio State at 59% to make the playoff, 14.7 to win it all. Georgia, by comparison, all this is based on the ESPN FPI data, their power ratings and efficiency metrics, things like that. Georgia right now, 46.9% chance of making the playoff, 10% chance of winning the national championship. You can decide for yourself if you think that's a good number or not. Here's a number I know you think is going to be good, though. Gator Hater Updater, 1,063 days. You'll have a great weekend. We'll see you Monday back here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. All right, and on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down as we go through and take your comments. We'll do a pretty good little bank of comments here today. I got to get off the air eventually because I got to do some radio and podcast stuff, but we'll kind of roll through a lot of that. And I'll remind you that speaking of this time of year when it is still hot, we've had this now in Georgia, gosh, I guess my whole life, but that thing where you think it's fall, you get a nice weekend of tempting fall weather, and then summer just comes right back with the haymaker across the face. Well, that's what's going on right now. That means that your air conditioning is still working overtime. And if yours is not quite getting the job done, you need that $99 Smiley tune-up from my friends at R.S. Andrews. They will get your system back to factory fresh specs, but you got to reach out to them right now, rsandrews.com. With that said, let me pop back over here and get some more comments. I'll do some YouTube, I'll do some Facebook, and we'll do kind of everything else. RT367 gives us the and on video. It's kind of funny that's kind of turned into a thing because it was one of those things that when I first started doing that, I was doing it unintentionally, but now it's become kind of a, I don't want to say catchphrase, but I certainly do it every single day. Nicholas King says, best defense ever in the Kirby Smart era, BA. I want to know your thoughts. I think that's out there for Georgia. I do. Now, the one thing that you know about the last 2 defenses from Georgia, the 2018 defense, were really, really good at limiting big play. The defense before that in 2017, they were really good at limiting points. Georgia was top 10 in the country. I forget the exact number, but 7th, 8th, something like that in points allowed. I think those can be misleading stats. But believe it or not, sometimes the points that you give up is more of a function of who you played as opposed to how you played. So the 2017 defense right now seems like the high water mark for Georgia defenses. But honestly, there were some statistical things with the 2017 defense that could have been better. we all know it could have been better about 2018. Not great at stopping the run, not as disruptive with the passer as you would like for it to be. So I think it's out in front of Georgia, much like a lot of things with this program right now. The ultimate reputation still to be determined. I think it's out in front of for Georgia to be a wholly disruptive defense and truly be the best of the Kirby Smart era. As it stands right now, I think it's just too early to tell. The reason why I'm going to pump the brakes and say, ooh, too early to tell, possible, Nick, but too early to tell, is look at those pass rush and tackles for loss numbers against non-FBS Power 5 teams. I should say Power 5 teams, non-Power 5 teams. Georgia did not do great in the backfield against Vanderbilt, was not particularly disruptive against Notre Dame. Very much so against Murray State, very much so against an Arkansas State team, which is probably better than you think, but nonetheless, still not a Power 5 opponent. So, Georgia's got a string of Power 5 games coming up against what we think of as relatively meager competition, Tennessee, South Carolina, and Kentucky. Does this defense get fat against those three teams? If it does, I think it speaks well for the Georgia defense really being a major, major factor in, going to some of these big, big games in November. Because go back and look at 2017 Auburn for a moment, the one that was played in November there at Jordan-Hare Stadium. Remember, that day, the Auburn offense made the Georgia defense look bad, spreading it out wide, and all of a sudden Kerryon Johnson had plenty of room to run in the middle, taking those deep shots at the Georgia secondary, kind of maybe exploiting what was a bit of a vulnerability for that group there that year. This Georgia team has a chance to be much deeper than that and much more solid at the three levels of defense. But I think there's work to be done for that to truly be true, and there's some time to get it done. I think it's a good comment. I think it's a great conversation starter. I guess I would say let's see how things play off between now and then. Green Soldier says, what are your early predictions for the Tennessee game? Be a 21+. Yeah, in terms of the overall final margin of victory, I'd be shocked if Georgia doesn't win by at least 21. If you're saying point spread, I think you got to start there. I will say that Jimmy Hyams saying that he heard that the line might be 28-29, knocking on the door being 30. That seems really, really high for a road game in the SEC. Seems really high, but maybe you have to recalibrate that. Something tells me it probably opens a little lower than that. Maybe it moves in that direction. I guess I'm thinking more along the lines of a 21-24 type of thing. If it's 28 in Knoxville, then you're telling me it's, you typically might say 3 points for being at home. You might even say more than that in this case with Tennessee coming to Athens. You tell me it's going to be 30. Georgia's a 34-point favorite. I guess they were nearly that much of a favorite last year in Athens. So yeah, maybe the 28's not as high as I first thought. Actually thinking about how big of a favorite Georgia was in Athens a year ago, maybe it's not that crazy. Although Georgia did not cover the spread last year against Tennessee, if memory serves. Dwayne G, I agree with you. Channing Tindall's been all over the place for Georgia this year. He's going to be a 4 soon. Yeah, I continue to be pretty high on Tindall, all things being equal. I continue to be pretty high on him. Jay Parker says UJ may not punt versus Tennessee. There's some Georgia fans who'd be happy about that. Danny Blackman says, what about special teams? Punt returns haven't looked good. Fielding punts, and that's going to wind up costing us if we don't get that fixed. We look lost on punt returns. Yeah, there are a few aspects of the special team situation for Georgia that have not been great. Georgia was not good punting the ball nor receiving punts this past Saturday against Notre Dame. I don't think anybody would deny that. That's got to be better. I think you're right about that. And I think the one thing to say on the punting side of this is that I'm still casting my lot with Camarda. I think he's the best punter on this roster. I think that Kirby Smart's words this week certainly indicate that. And I think that we have seen examples of good punts from him before. He's just going to find a way to be more consistent and kind of do them when they matter most. As somebody said a little earlier this week, it's not even so much that Camarda's a terrible punter. It's just that his worst punts have seemingly come at the worst times. And that I have a hard time disagreeing with. Bad timing on some of the worst Camarda punts. But I still believe that Camarda, and now listen, it's kind of an interesting thing. You don't want your team punting very much. But I still believe that at some point this season, Camarda's going to come up with a huge punt for UGA. And for now, my confidence remains with him. Dapper Dan says, who would you like to see handling punts? I guess my fan favorite choice in this would probably be Dominic Blaylock, because Kirby Smart even mentioned this in the spring as a possibility. Blaylock was one of those guys that did have a miscue this past week, though. But hopefully, I think it'd be great if he would eventually grow into that role, because one of the things, some of the highlights we show of Blaylock sometimes from high school can be a little bit misleading. We have a lot of really cool video of him catching the football and doing things like a wide receiver does. But ask anybody who played against Blaylock when he was at Walton. A lot of what Blaylock did was that wildcat quarterback thing, or what we think of in Athens as a wild dog quarterback situation. Blaylock was really good at that, which means he'd just take the ball, put a toe in the dirt, make a man miss, and he was just hard to tackle in that regard. Very hard to tackle. That seems to me to be a skill set that really translates well to being a punt returner. I think he could be very dynamic for Georgia in that spot. But he's got to be a little more consistent. I think Saturday he was also one of the problems there. Green Soldier says, I'm not sold on the wild dog, to be honest. Yeah, I'm not necessarily a huge fan of that as a play call for Georgia, but it clearly worked for Blaylock when he was at Walton, and it's also, I think, kind of a translatable skill for punt returning. By the way, Green Soldier last week, for those of you who don't know, was with us for DawgNation Express. It's about a guy that earned MVP honors for us last week. Green Soldier helped us out, and man, what a job that he did. I really appreciate it. It was fun to hang out with Sergeant Green as well. Kathy Aquavia Green brings up a really good point. I'm glad she asked. She said, aside from betting, why does covering the spread even matter? So, Kathy, I can't promise you I can convince you on this, but here's why it matters to me. I am always really interested to see how teams perform in comparison to expectation, because I do believe that's an extra layer of understanding about games. For instance, there were some Georgia fans after the Vanderbilt game who saw Georgia win, was the final score 30-6, and they said, well, this wasn't really all that impressive of a performance from Georgia. However, in my mind, Georgia probably exceeded the overall expectations for the game. The Vegas people, who are generally pretty good at this kind of stuff, had listed Georgia as a 14-point favorite for that game, right? Am I right about that, 14? Georgia covering the number there, I think, was a pretty strong indication that not only had Georgia matched expectations for the game, had actually exceeded it. Not everybody's going to agree with that, and people have their own vantage point, their own point of view. But this is how I use point spread. So the truth is, I very rarely bet on anything, but I do like paying attention to the point spreads because I do think it gives us an idea of what true expectations are and how you perform in comparison to those. Maybe the opposite kind of point of view when Georgia, who the experts thought would win by 2 touchdowns last week, failed to do that. It's an extra layer of context for that. I also am a big believer in a world where it's very easy to do what I do, which is speaking to a microphone, just sort of spout off one opinion after another. I think the people who put their money where their mouth is, if Vegas is wrong about this, if our friends at MyBookie are wrong with the point spread, they lose money. So if they have a number that's way too high or a number that's way too low, you better believe that smart people are going to exploit that. So their opinion matters because they are truly putting their money where their mouth is. And the overwhelming majority of people will never bet on any game whatsoever. But the betting opinion on this, because it has to be vetted against actual numbers, will always be interesting to me. So as I said before, I don't know that convinces you, but that's my reason for caring. James Bryan also says that covering spreads impresses pollsters. What else does James say? And it still matters towards the end of the season. Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, if you're a team that's going out there, and I gave this number. We do a show every Friday. It'll be on the website a little bit later on today. It's called Go With The Flow. It's also presented by our friends at R.S. Andrews. So here's another interesting thing about point spread. So Notre Dame on Saturday is favored by, it's like 12.5 now against Virginia. So dating back to 1999 as a between 10 and 13-point favorite. Notre Dame opened this week as 11 at 12.5 now, kind of in that range of 10 to 13 points. Since 1999, do you know that Notre Dame is just 9-5 in those games? And I don't mean against the spread. I mean playing at home as a 10 to 13-point favorite. Their record from a win-loss straight up on the field, they're just 9-5. That means dating back, 2 decades, they've lost 5 times at home as a double-digit favorite. You want to talk about why people don't like Notre Dame, why people don't like the media narrative around Notre Dame? Once again, point spreads gives us a chance to understand that. Big favorite, they can't even win the game. At least 5 times they did. That kind of speaks to that there as well. For me, it's just additional context. It's also kind of a nice thing to add to a game that otherwise would be pretty boring. The slate of games here this weekend, if there are no point spreads, boy, it'd be tough to want to watch some of those. Mikey Wyken says, "Go Dogs, will make it to the national championship." Good to see that level of confidence from Mikey right now. And this is that kind of time where a lot of folks are going to be debating, okay, how confident are you in Georgia right now? Are you more confident than you were before the season started? Are you less confident? And for me, admittedly, that's a little bit of a difficult question to answer. On the one hand, Georgia has passed one of its major tests. By almost anyone's account, of the 3 or 4 toughest games in the Georgia schedule, it's already played one of those, and it's won it. Compared that to, like, say, Florida, who hasn't done that yet. Compare that to Alabama, who hasn't done that yet. Clemson probably has done that yet because they only probably play a couple games that matter at all. But we actually know more about Georgia than we do most of the teams. Now, the Notre Dame game is a bit of a Rorschach test. People kind of see from that game what they want to see from it, for the good or for the bad. But it was definitely, along with Texas A&M and Auburn and Florida, almost anyone's belief those were the 4 toughest games for Georgia this season. Georgia's played one, and it's won it. So the fact that you've checked off one of those boxes, seemingly, it gives you some room for that confidence to go up. Admittedly, though, some of the debate from this week about, what Georgia did or didn't do offensively in the first half, Kirby said all the right things about that on Tuesday. But actually following through and then doing some of that in games the rest of the way, I think it is a little easier said than done. So I do want to see a little more from Georgia in that regard, but when you look at Georgia and its resume thus far, having won on the road in the SEC, having beaten a top 10 team, Georgia has, by that comparison, accomplished a lot more than many other teams in college football have. The other thing to say here is I picked Georgia to go undefeated 12-0, while also saying that Georgia's toughest game would be at Auburn. All of a sudden, that game at Auburn seems even tougher than I first thought. So am I, by a percentage point or two, a little less confident in Georgia going 12-0 undefeated? Just on the basis of the fact that Auburn right now looks even more formidable than I guessed. Maybe a little less, by a percentage point or two, maybe. We'll get a few more comments while we have some time. Kim Barrett checking in from Cleveland, Georgia. Boy, I know Cleveland very well. Love that part of the North Georgia area. Beautiful, beautiful in Cleveland. A lot of friends in the North Hall area. Love driving up that, lake, mountains, everything else. Cleveland's beautiful. Wayne Kirkland says, if Kirby is conservative, airing out because Fromm throws interceptions in practice, back shoulder on sideline, is great, but limited. Yeah, I think that Kirby has been more conservative because I think that he feels like he's got a lead. I think he feels like he trusts his defense. I feel like he trusts his running game, and he wants to lean on that. I also think that, Georgia tried some stuff on Saturday to, to make some, in the hopes that Notre Dame would make some guys miss, or that Georgia's skill position players would make some guys miss, and the Notre Dame guys kind of didn't do it. So from that standpoint, you got to tip your hat to the Irish a little bit. Leon Hutchinson asked an interesting question. Pardon me for being self-promoting for a moment. He says, "What's your Falcons podcast? I know it's at 1 p.m., just don't know where." So here is the place to go to find this. It is AJC, Atlanta Falcons News Now, on Facebook. That's the name of the Facebook page. If you'll just type AJC, Atlanta Falcons News Now, into Facebook, it'll pop up there. And we go live there at 1 p.m. with myself and the former Falcon Chuck Smith on Fridays, Mondays and Fridays at 1 p.m. We do that at the same time each and every week. So much the same way you watch DawgNation Daily, you can watch AJC Falcons News Now, sponsored by Miller Lite. You can watch that day at 1 p.m. But you've got to find AJC, Atlanta Falcons News Now, on Facebook. You can find that there and be able to see more about that. Brian Mullis says, I had a feeling that Notre Dame was going to be closer than the experts had predicted. I think our hardest upcoming game will be Auburn. Yeah, Brian, I agree with you on that. Then here on YouTube to finish things out on Friday, a couple of things. Memphis Dog says, not saying Cook would not do well in punt returns, but you can't deny that Tyler has done exceptionally well, except for the one fumble. Yeah, and, I know a lot of people want to try to attach some sort of causation to Simmons' fumble. There's wearing a shoulder brace, something like that. I mean, I just think miscues are going to happen. I'm not saying that you excuse them and explain them away. I'm not saying that at all. I am saying that no one's impervious to mistakes. Georgia made a big one, and Simmons will certainly come back and in future games try not to make that mistake. But but it did happen. Prior to that, I'd been pretty happy with Simmons as a punt returner. I don't know that anybody yet is going to be quite as dynamic as McColl could have been for Georgia last year, but I wouldn't let one blunder against Notre Dame, or if you want to add a Blaylock in there too, as costly as it was, I wouldn't let a handful of blunders maybe convince you this is some huge issue for Georgia. It almost hurt Georgia bad against Notre Dame. In the first half, it was a killer. But I don't know that I necessarily think that Georgia has some sort of major punt return problem. I'm assuming that over the course of the rest of the season, that somehow stabilizes, whether it's Simmons or Blaylock or somebody else, maybe Kyrus Jackson, when he's back healthy again. I'm assuming that stabilizes at some point. Green Soldier says, so what's the biggest challenge when it comes to Auburn? Late in the season, away game. I think the away part of this cannot be discounted. Georgia has not played well in truly hostile stadiums. Now, to the fans' credit, Georgia doesn't play in that many hostile environments. Essentially took over Notre Dame. Georgia dominated Tennessee on the road in 2017 so much there was hardly any opposing fans left by the time the game got to the second half. But when it comes to really hostile environments, like what LSU was last year, a lot of Georgia fans there, but LSU fans came to make some noise. Auburn in 2017 was a true, legitimate, hostile road environment. Even Ole Miss in 2016, if you want to count that, it was a very different kind of Georgia team, but it was still an SEC West team on the road. These hostile environments, Georgia has not performed well in those stadiums. That's still a test for Georgia to pass this season. That's a test in particular for Kirby Smart to pass. Have your team ready to face what's coming there that day. So I am still going to be a little skeptical of Georgia and what I think of as a really just breathing down your neck intense crowd. Jordan-Hare Stadium, I believe, will be that in November. And I also think the Auburn defense is really good. I think that the Auburn defense is built in a lot of ways to limit the run. And that's a game where I think that Georgia is going to have a lot of the pressure for the game plan put on the shoulders of the passing game. I think against Auburn, you have to do it that way. You can't expect to go in there and just, chop wood all day long and move the ball with ease and at your will when it comes to running the football. I think Auburn's got a really good defensive line. That I have to give them credit for. Also, probably a secondary right now. It's maybe playing a little bit better than you would have thought. All right, what else? TM says, true away game for Auburn. Fromm hasn't shown he's elite in those games. That is one spot where Fromm probably still has some room for improvement. I'll agree with that. It's going to shape his legacy this season. I agree with that there, too. I think he says facts. I think those are probably all facts. I think those are all probably facts. Kappa UGA 2018 reminds us that Cleveland, Georgia is also the Cabbage Patch baby hometown. That's right. That's right. My daughter wants to go there so bad. We haven't been there yet, but she definitely wants to go there. Byron Dean Butler says if the Dogs don't win big, will the national media continue to rip it? I don't know there's been a whole lot of ripping of Georgia. Byron, do you think there has been? I know there was the one column we referenced on Monday's show. Other than that, I don't know there's been a ton of ripping of UGA. There's a little skepticism, and there's been kind of a lot of weird level of praise for Notre Dame for having lost the game. I wouldn't say yet that Georgia has a whole bunch of critics. Now, you're going to have, the random SEC hater that's going to, use Georgia for a little bit of attention or something like that. But thus far, Georgia really has not developed a lot of critics. I even said this last week. It'd almost be nice if Georgia did have a few more. Maybe the Notre Dame gives you a little more of that, but I actually don't mind having a few people kind of talking bad about you a little bit. Let me try to get one more, then we'll get ready to get out of here. I was looking for one. Now I can't find it. Mike D on the subject of Jake Fromm. Will says we haven't won a national championship. That's why we have no respect. It's kind of funny that you say that, though, Will, because I don't know that that Georgia is necessarily lacking respect. It is clear that there is a level of media attention that would say that Georgia certainly needs to prove a big point in big games and win the championship and all that kind of stuff. That's no different than what fans think. For the most part, though, you've got a sizable number of people who will actually talk up Georgia and think that Georgia's still very much in the competition. Now, admittedly, teams like Alabama and Clemson are going to get a little bit more respect because of what they have done in recent years. It's just human nature that previous years bleed into this. But I actually don't see a great deal of what I think of as Georgia haters on the national scene. Chris Brandon brings up Danny Cannell. That's a name I even mentioned by name last week. I want to say that Cannell didn't have Georgia in his top 8 or something like that at one point in time this season, but that's just his shtick, and I don't mind him doing that. Y'all know I like pro wrestling. That's a little bit of a pro wrestling gimmick, and I'm not really mad at that. That's just kind of his thing. I did see something kind of interesting this week. Feinbaum had on Barry Trammell, the Oklahoma. I think he works for the Oklahoman. I think that's the name of the paper, and he only ranks his top 10. I thought this was kind of interesting. I've heard other people say this before. On the basis of what's happened this year, and on the basis of that, he had, I think, Auburn ranked number 1, Georgia ranked number 5, and if you're only going to do that on the basis of just this year alone, That seems about right. He didn't have Alabama in his top 10 at all. So, I mean, I think you are starting to see a little bit more skepticism of Alabama because of, I think people are just ready to see Alabama play somebody. So, in a weird way, you probably see more Alabama, I'm going to use air quotes here, Alabama hate than you see Georgia hate there at the moment. Reed and Dana Brookshire says Herb Street didn't show us any love either. I know he was a little, I guess, critical of Georgia coming off this past Saturday, but y'all got to give Herb Street a break now because remember last year, Herb Street put his reputation on the line to say that Georgia belonged in the playoffs. So you can't call Herb Street a hater. Now, he may not have been pleased with Georgia this past Saturday, but I'm going to defend Kirk and say you can't call him a hater because he put himself out there on Georgia in the playoff a year ago. So y'all got to give him a little bit of a free pass on that. And Kathy says that Herbie was one of the guys singing the praises of Notre Dame. Yeah, there was a lot of that last week. As I said before, though, Herb Street's been out there on Georgia. I don't know a limb about Georgia. Jimmy Durham says, do you think Georgia's a top 4 team right now? Yeah, without a doubt. Without a doubt. Now, I don't know who all the top 4 probably are. I think that right now you'd probably have to say it's Georgia, it's Clemson, it's Alabama. Those are the top 3, despite the fact that those other 3 haven't played a whole lot of teams yet. Those are the top 3. And then your 4th is either Oklahoma, Ohio State, or LSU. LSU would probably get my nod right now because that throw game for them is just really significant. They really move the ball in the air very well. But defensively, they got some major issues. I am ready to see Ohio State play somebody. And if Ohio State goes out and dominates Nebraska, even though they're a big favorite in that game, to get back to the point spreads for a minute, even though they're a big favorite, you go into Lincoln hostile crowd. If you win that game by 3 or 4 touchdowns, you got to start taking Ohio State very seriously. And you got to start taking Field very seriously at that point in time. This is a big put-up moment for Ohio State at Nebraska. At that point in time, I think that Ohio State, if they do that on Saturday, will have separated themselves from LSU and Oklahoma a little bit, joining Georgia, Clemson, Alabama in that top 4. I'm still just pretty skeptical of Oklahoma, and maybe it's unfair to be that way, but neutral field, I would favor Ohio State over Oklahoma. I'd probably favor LSU over Oklahoma, but that's what weeks like this are for. You get a chance to kind of prove some of that kind of stuff. So we'll pay attention to that and see how it all goes. Let me get ready to wrap this up here today, though, and remind you that much the same way you get UGA news here on DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger each and every day, you can also get your Atlanta news now by checking in throughout the day at ajc.com. Including a big continuation report on Sunday. A lot of us have family members, friends, others who are in kind of assisted living care, and sometimes it's hard to know what's going on behind the scenes in a lot of those places. Well, the AJC has done an incredible investigation that really brings a lot of the facts to light. It's the kind of work the AJC is famous for, and you can check that out this upcoming Sunday, ajc.com. You can get your Atlanta news now at ajc.com. Also some stuff on the Falcons, big game on Sunday against the Titans. Braves getting ready for the playoffs. Big weekend preview, too. Always a lot going on around the Atlanta area on the weekends, and this weekend may be more poignant than normal because of the fact that Georgia doesn't play. So get all of that and more. Check in throughout the day at ajc.com to get your Atlanta news now. And as I said before, I hope you'll check out Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews. That's on the DawgNation video channels. Really just a few minutes' time here. You'll be able to check that out. We kind of go through the games of the week. We also, off the top and at the beginning of the program, kind of look at some of those futures odds for Georgia. Odds to win the national championship, odds for Fromm and Swift win the Heisman, kind of some of the other stuff, and we kind of talk about where we feel about those things 4 weeks into the season. That's going to be a fun episode of Go With The Flow presented by R.S. Andrews. And speaking of R.S. Andrews, they show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. It's why DawgNation loves and trusts R.S. Andrews. It's why you can feel the same way. Check them out online at rsandrews.com. They'll have a great weekend. Thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. I look forward to seeing you back here on Monday for our program once again. Get ready for game week against the Vols. We'll talk to you then.